So I want to show you in this video the way how I like setting up Proxmox so that it's ready to go. And I will also show you a really nice resource I found that for the most part takes the guesswork out of setting up Proxmox containers, VMs and whatnot. So let's start. So again, as I said, the machine is exactly the same one. It's an EliteDesk 800 G3 Mini. It does have a i5-6500T. It does have a refurbished, of course these are all refurbished machines, SSD, but it is in fairly decent health from what I remember. So let's log in and check. So first thing is go to Proxmox and download it. So Proxmox download. You go here and you download this one, the Proxmox VE 7.3 installer. You download that. There's a couple of ways to put it on a USB stick. My preferred way is Ventoy. I've done a video on Ventoy, and it's a beautiful piece of software. You could also, for example, take your USB stick here and use Rufus to burn it, the whole ISO onto the USB stick. Very easy to do. There's plenty of videos on the internet on how to use Rufus and how to burn ISOs using Rufus onto a USB stick. All you do is do that, pop it into the HP machine or any machine for that matter. Ensure that you boot from the USB, and Proxmox is super easy to install. There's just maybe 6 or 7 clicks, just next. Couple of information you need to put in. The most critical being that a server by its very nature should be static IP. Very rare cases where it isn't, but I would say 99.9% of the time it's a static IP. And hit next, let it install, reboot it, take off of course your USB so it doesn't boot from it again, and you're on Proxmox. Whatever IP you set, all you do is just go to that IP. So in my case it's 10.10.10.3 and then :8006. It'll bring you into the login screen. So the login is going to be root and then whatever password you set during the install process. And as you can see, the minute we log on, you have this nag here. So it's basically nagging you that you don't have a valid subscription for this server. Go to proxmox.com and get a list of valid options. You're free to get the subscription. There is a home user subscription. I think it's maybe $100 a year. For my server, I do subscribe to it simply because, not that it gives me any benefit, so to speak. It's more of that I respect Proxmox, the Proxmox project and the Proxmox team so much that I say that here's a little bit of money, please continue what you're doing. Now, I do understand that a lot of people don't want to do that. They don't have the means to do that. That's completely fine. So I will show you how I set up my Proxmox server. So first things first is you hit OK. And it takes you by default into the data center screen. But your actual Proxmox server is right here. So we click PVE2. I've named it PVE2. If I go to summary, and there we go. So you can see here that it's the 4-core Intel 6500T, just as it was over here. And it has 24 gigs of RAM, so 16 plus 8, 24 gigs of RAM. And you can see that if I go to the disks right over here, there we go. So you can see it's a SanDisk 512. Sorry, this is a SanDisk. I think it's a 256 gig. Yeah, it's not a 512 model, but it's a 256 gig SSD, and you can see the wear out's at 8%, which is honestly pretty decent for a refurbished SSD. You can see here that it has been used, but it's got 92% life remaining on it. I think that this SSD will serve my friend for a good 1 or 2 years, depending again, of course, on how much data is written, but this will work more than enough for him. So first thing that I like doing when it comes to Proxmox is going to the shell and doing a couple of commands. So first thing is pveam update. So let me explain you what pveam update means. Is that if you go into the server and if you go to here and if you go to container templates and you hit templates here, you can see here that the list of the templates are only the operating systems. So, Alma Linux, Alpine, CentOS, Fedora, Ubuntu. But Proxmox does offer a fair bit of other um, pre-packaged templates that are not here. So the way to get these templates, very simple. Go into your server, hit shell, and the command is pveam update. Hit an enter. Doesn't take too long, few seconds. And if we go back again to container templates, suddenly now this list is much longer. So you can see here a new section for turnkey Linux pops up. And you have all sorts of apps here that you can, deploy in a container and, enjoy Proxmox. So that's the first thing I like to do. Second thing I like to do, now granted this was a new install of Proxmox. Okay, I downloaded the latest 7.3.1 installer from 22nd of November. But it might not have any updates. But what I also like to do is an apt update. Give it an enter. You can see here that there's an unauthorized IP. I'll tell you why. It's because, again, it's going into certain repositories which you are not authorized for because you don't have a subscription. And then you say apt upgrade. And there are 14 files, 14 programs that can be updated, packages. So we're going to hit enter, update it. And as you can see that although this is a i5 6700T 6th gen, we're already at the 13th gen in Intel, so this is like 6-7 generations old. It's still running pretty fast, right? Granted, there's nothing on the machine right now with the exception of Proxmox, but it is running pretty fast. So let's do a quick reboot. In this case, there was no kernel. But if there's a kernel, it's always good to do a reboot. So let's do a reboot. And we are back now, logged into Proxmox. Proxmox has rebooted. If you look at the summary, it spiked up during all these procedures to 7% only. So, despite kind of, stressing the CPU, doing updates, whatnot, it's at 6% or 7% utilization. So really good. Now, the resource I want to show you is a really nice resource. It's Proxmox helper scripts from T-Tech, of course on GitHub. You can see here that this is really nicely organized, and these are automated scripts to help you set up Proxmox properly and correctly. I use this extensively. This is really, really good. So first things first is we're going to click on the Proxmox VE7 post install script. So if you read it, it's really nice. It says this script will give the options to disable the enterprise repo, add the correct PVE7 sources, enable the no subscription repo, and remove the nag and update and reboot PVE. So it tells you here that run the command below in the Proxmox shell only. So I'm going to hit copy, go back to here, go to the shell. I'm going to hit a paste. I'm going to hit enter. And it says, do you want to run the PVE7 script? I'm going to hit yes. Asking you, do you want to disable the enterprise repository? We do, because we don't have the enterprise subscription. So hence, we're going to see a lot of those errors when doing apt updates. There's no point in having this there enabled. So we're going to hit yes. So it's going to disable it for you. I was asking you that, do you want to add the correct PVE7 sources? We're going to hit yes for that also. Do you want to enable the no subscription repository? So since we don't have a subscription, yes, we want to. Do you want to add the disabled and beta test repository? Now, this is really up to you, honestly. If it's in a home environment, I would say yes, but if it's deployed in a production environment, I would say no. So we're going to hit yes in this case. And it's going to ask you, do you want to disable the subscription nag? We're going to hit yes. And do you want to update Proxmox VE7? The answer is going to be no, because we just did an apt update. But in the event that you didn't do that and you run this script before doing an update, hit a yes. But for the purpose of this video, I'm going to hit yes. It's going to do an upgrade in the background, and it's going to spit back some information for you. So I just want to open another window here so that I can kind of show you what's happening as far as the CPU is concerned. You can see here, yes, it's spiking up to 22%. I/O delay is reasonable. Still doing the update. Let's move this here. You can see here, yeah, it's spiking up to 33%, 28%. I/O is, kind of at 3%, which is good enough. Now, I/O delay is a very important metric to take care of. Basically shows you, the easiest way to kind of explain it is how much queue there is to your storage device. And that's why I always recommend, especially for Proxmox, use an SSD for more critical things. In a small Proxmox server like this, using a hard drive is okay, but it is going to be slow. You're going to see this I/O delay spike up all the time because the hard drive just isn't as fast. SSD is the way to go, and especially SSDs, especially now a 1 terabyte SSD is under $100. I think it's worth the extra outlay. Okay, so it's still cooking here. It's doing its update stuff, and it's going to ask you, do you want to reboot? So let's just reboot, and I'll see you back after the reboot. And we are back. So it's done the reboot. It's done all the updates, and we are back. So let's try something here. I'm going to copy this URL over here. I'm going to close this window. I'm going to create a new window, and I'm going to go to the URL. And as you can see, we're in no subscription nag at all. And if you look at the PVE here, and if you look at the repositories, it has done all the work for you, right? It's disabled stuff. It's added some stuff, like you can see here. Enterprise repository is disabled, and the test repository, while it's added, it hasn't been enabled. So again, if you want to test it or use more bleeding edge Proxmox packages, enable it. I would say it's okay at home, depends, but definitely not in a production environment. So we're done with that. Now, honestly, this tool here, or this website from T-Tech, if you go through it, it basically gives you all scripts to set up a lot of what people want to do. Let me give you an example. Let's say you want to set up Home Assistant. There are 4 different ways you could set up Home Assistant. So the first one is, it tells you clearly, it's a Home Assistant VM. It's not a container, it's a VM. So you can see here, it gives you the description. Okay, and it even gives you the default settings for this particular VM will be 4 gigs of RAM, 32 gig of storage, 2 virtual CPUs, and using a stable image, I guess, of the OS. Here's another example. You can use Proxmox, Home Assistant OS VM. You could use just a container, right? If you want to use that. You could set up also Home Assistant Core, LXC, which is a container, or you could go via Podman. Now, Podman is similar to Docker, but from Red Hat, I think. And it just basically does that for you, right? So again, it really depends on how you want to set it up and what suits your needs. Now, for my friend, for the sake of simplicity, we're going to go with the Home Assistant OS VM. Okay, so again, very simple. Copy this from here and go here into PVE2 shell and hit paste. And we're going to hit enter. So it's going to ask you, it's a guided install. It says this will create a new Home Assistant OS VM. Proceed, hit yes. Use the default settings. Now, if you say yes, the default settings are going to be this. Now, I think that 4 gigs of RAM is enough for Home Assistant. Again, it really depends on how much you're doing with Home Assistant. For a basic setup, I think to start with 4 gigs is enough, and so is 32 gigs of storage. Again, it really depends what you're doing. 2 vCPUs, I think, are also more than enough. So we're going to hit yes, use the default settings. So there we go. Now, while this is cooking, you can see here CPU utilization. So, let's just do a side by side just to get an idea of, the kind of utilization this HP ProDesk will get. And I'm going to change this to hour maximum just so it gives you a little bit more granularity. And also keep a close eye on the RAM usage also, because again, this is something important. But you can see here, there we go. It's already creating the VM for you, and it's gonna configure and all these things. And you can see here, look, the I/O delay is spiking because of the excessive writes to the SSD. Now imagine this was spiking quite high, and this is an SSD, but imagine if it was a hard drive. This would be pegged constantly and it would be slow. So again, hard drives are okay for mass storage, but using it is kind of, if you're okay with the slowness, it's more than enough. So let's go to the console. Let's see what's going on here. You can see here that it's booting up, and we should have Home Assistant ready to go shortly. You can see here that even while booting up, it's using 53% of the CPU. Makes sense why, because it was set up as 2 cores, right? So maximum usage of 2 cores is 50% because we have 4 cores. And there we go. Your Home Assistant is now set up and ready to go. According to the T-Tech site, you can see here that whatever the interface IP is, :8123, it also clearly tells you here how to get to it here. So it's assigned this IP here, 114. So if you go to 10.10.10.114 :8123, you will see Home Assistant. So let's just do that. 10.10.10.114 :8123. There we go. So as you can see, Home Assistant is ready to go. It's doing a little bit of a preliminary configuration setup, but as you can see here, that even while it's doing that, I wouldn't call this as taxing the CPU, right? So we're going to let it do its thing here. We're going to come back to this a little bit later. Let me close a couple of windows here. I'll leave this on so you can have a look. All right. Second thing is my friend wants to also use Node-RED in conjunction with Home Assistant to do a little bit of automation, and also he wants to do a little bit of other separate type of automation. So we're going to set up a Node-RED LXC. Now LXC is a container, so same thing. We're going to hit copy. Go again to PVE2, and we're going to paste this over here. Hit enter. And for his case, the Node-RED default settings are going to be more than enough, right? He doesn't want to do anything heavy duty. You can see here the default settings are 1 gig of RAM, 4 gig of storage, and 1 virtual CPU. So this is more than enough. We're going to use the default settings. There we go. Let's have a look at the utilization here. So you can see here that despite running Home Assistant, it's doing other stuff, you can see here that it's not really spiking the CPU utilization. To me, honestly, I think a 6500T is more than sufficient. The limiting factor would probably be your SSD and your RAM. I would say RAM mainly, followed by the SSD capacity, speed, whatnot. And then I would say the last thing is CPU. Again, this really does depend on what you are using it for. If you're using heavy compute, of course, the CPU utilization is going to be higher. So it really does depend. So as you can see here, Node-RED is, on its way to getting installed. We're going to look at a couple of other things that he wants to do. Let's go through this. So, these are all the automation scripts. MQTT is, Mosquito. Again, it's for automation or IoT. He doesn't need it. Database. Again, a couple of different database options you can set up. Zigbee. This is really nice here. So we're going to do a couple of things here. So Uptime Kuma. This is to monitor all the services and the uptimes for it. So we're going to hit copy again here. You can see this is done. We're going to hit paste over here, hit enter, and we're going to use just the default settings because it's more than enough for Uptime Kuma. Okay, as you can see here, we have already got one VM full fat VM. We got one container up and running. Another one is being installed, and the RAM utilization is only 4. Well, let's round it up to 5 gigs of usage. Very, very efficient. CPU utilization, honestly, this to me is nothing. I would only start getting worried once it's above 50%. I/O delay also is looking good so far. It's just, it's a little bit busy because we're doing installing and whatnot. Okay, while this is cooking, let's look at another thing.